Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and highly discussed article called Child Marriages and Forced Marriages Are Not Permitted in Islam, published by Islamic Civilization. Now, our goal here is absolutely impartial. We are just going to break down the specific legal, historical, and theological arguments that this source material presents regarding Islamic marriage rules. So let's jump right in.
We're going to start right off the bat with a definitive baseline rule. The article cites Muhammad al-Masari from his book Women in Islam, and he states it pretty bluntly. Child marriages find no approval in Islam. The text explicitly separates Islamic jurisprudence from societies where infants or young kids are married off before they even know what marriage is. This quote, it's basically the foundational premise for everything we're about to explore today.
Okay, here is our roadmap. First, consent in Islamic marriage. Second, the historical exception explained. Third, the purpose of prophetic marriages. And finally, banning forced marriages. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Consent in Islamic marriage and the prerequisite of maturity.
This source text builds its whole case on a really core logical argument. Basically, personal consent is an absolute necessity in an Islamic marriage. But here's the thing. True personal consent naturally requires a certain level of mental maturity, right? You need the capacity to actually make a life-altering decision. Because of that, the source argues that personal consent and child marriage are fundamentally incompatible. It's like oil and water. You literally cannot have one if you have the other.
Now, the article clarifies that Islam doesn't actually set a strict magic number for marriage across the board. Instead, it ties readiness to practical milestones. Think of it as a more holistic approach to being ready. It highly recommends getting married as soon as someone is both mentally mature enough and financially capable of handling it. On the flip side, the text notes that staying unmarried for absolutely no reason is discouraged, framing marriage as a really positive building block for society.
And just to show how big of a deal this is, the author cites this well-known tradition from Prophet Muhammad. When a person marries, he perfects half of his faith. So let him fear God regarding the other half. The source uses this to show that marriage isn't just a simple legal contract in Islam, it's seen as a major religious virtue, a path that literally fulfills half of a believer's spiritual obligations. That's huge.
All right, moving on to Section 2, the historical exception explained, contextualizing the past. So you might be wondering about the elephant in the room, and Muhammad al-Masari anticipates and directly answers this exact query. What about the Prophet's marriage to Aisha? According to the text, this was consummated when she was 9 years old. So how does a religion supposedly ban child marriage when this very famous historical event exists? Let's look at how the source unpacks this.
The crucial point here is how Islamic jurisprudence contextualizes the event. The text lays out a multi-layered defense. First, it notes this specific marriage was contracted under Arab traditions in Mecca that were totally valid at the time. Second, it happened early on, way before the detailed laws regarding women's rights, specifically the right to reject a partner, were even revealed. Because those later laws absolutely require maturity for consent, scholars classify this exception as either completely repealed by later rulings or as special legislation tied strictly to the Prophet's unique role. The main takeaway, the source is adamant this cannot be used as a loophole to justify child marriage today. No way.
Section 3. The purpose of prophetic marriages, going beyond personal desire.
The source provides a really important framework for viewing historical leaders here. It argues that rulers and prophets don't just get married for personal reasons or desires. Instead, they marry to further the interests of the state, to lock down political alliances, or to advance their religious cause. So the text is saying that the marriages of Prophet Muhammad, who was acting as both a ruler and a prophet, were deeply strategic. They're about political and religious objectives, not himself.
To back this up theologically, the text points to the Quran, specifically Surah Al-Najm, verses 3 and 4. He does not speak from his own desire. It is only a revelation sent down to him. The author is using this to anchor the idea that prophetic actions are divinely guided, rather than driven by human impulses, meaning these historical events were totally purposeful, not just arbitrary choices.
Okay, get ready for this, because this number is staggering. 2,210. That is the massive number of prophetic traditions, or hadith, that Aisha transmitted during her lifetime.
The source heavily emphasizes the immense educational and religious outcomes of this specific union. Aisha became the second most prolific narrator of hadith in history. Because she was so close to the Prophet, she ended up providing the Muslim community with absolutely crucial legal and theological insights. Even more importantly, she documented the private, day-to-day domestic life of the Prophet, details that literally no one else would have had access to. The text argument is that the primary purpose of this marriage was the transmission of this knowledge. Without her, a massive, vital chunk of Islamic teachings would have been lost forever.
Finally, Section 4, banning forced marriages and establishing a foundational precedent.
The text recounts this really gripping historical anecdote from Abdullah bin Buraida. So, a young girl comes to the Messenger of Allah seeking justice. Her story? Her own father had forced her into a marriage with his nephew, and his motivation was entirely about social climbing. He just wanted to raise the nephew's lowly social status by attaching him to his daughter, completely ignoring the fact that she did not want this.
The girl laid out her grievance super clearly, saying, "My father married me off to his nephew in order to raise his lowly status." The source pulls in some commentary from Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani on this exact phrasing. Al-Nabhani points out that her objection wasn't that her cousin was a bad match on paper. Her objection was 100% based on the fact that she did not consent. She was given away against her will.
And the Prophet's response was immediate and decisive. Step 1, he listened to her case. Step 2, he instantly granted her the legal right to annul the marriage right then and there. The source uses this specific ruling as definitive, undeniable proof that forced marriages are invalid in Islam, pointing out that the highest legal authority intervened directly to protect a woman's right to consent.
But the story ends with this incredibly powerful response from the young girl after she gets her freedom. She says, "I accept what my father has done, but I wanted to inform the other women that fathers do not have any authority to give their daughters in marriage against their wishes." I mean, what a game changer. She utilized her own crisis to establish a universal legal right for all women in her society, setting a rock-solid precedent that parental authority does not ever override personal consent.
Well, we have covered a ton of ground today, looking purely at the structured arguments presented in our source text, from the strict necessity of personal consent to how it tackles those complex historical exceptions. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question to chew on. How do historical contexts and religious exceptions shape our modern understanding of ancient texts? It is a question that really challenges us to look deeper than surface-level readings, no matter what we're studying. Thank you so much for hanging out and exploring this text with me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.